We finished all of our pin fitting, and now we're ready for the next step. Now we've completely have a pattern of half of our chair, but we know that everything's doubled up, so we'll be able to open this up, and we'll have both arms covered and all of the back covered. So today we're going to prepare for taking this off. We want to make sure we have all of the information we need about this chair and how this fabric is relating to the shape and the size of this piece before we take it off. So here we are. It's time to mark the skirt. You can decide wherever you want your skirt to be. The original upholstery has a 6-inch skirt, and I could have a 6-inch skirt again, but I think I'm going to have a 7-inch skirt, only because when I sew my skirt onto this piece, I'm going to have the bulk of the skirt, the welt cord, and the slipcover fabric, the cover fabric, all kind of creating some bulk where that seam is. And where the original skirt line was, I've got the bulk of the welt cord and all of those fabrics. So I'd rather not have both of those bulky sections and elements right on top of each other. So I'm going to make my skirt a little bit taller, a little higher, so that the seams will not come together at the same place. So my new seam will be an inch higher than the old seam, and that gives me enough room. So I need to mark where I need to cut this bottom. So I decided I wanted a 7-inch skirt. I'm going to mark 7 inches. That's going to be my cutting line. That's why I'm marking it with a Sharpie. My actual seam allowance will be a 1/2 inch above that. I will make a 7-inch skirt, and when I put this all together, it will be a 1/2 inch off the floor. So if I know how long I want my skirt to be, which is 7 inches, I mark 7 inches. Then I'm going to make this skirt, and the 1/2 inch seam allowance will lift it up that 1/2 inch off the floor. You don't want your slipcover skirt dragging on the floor, nor do you want it to be too short so that the original skirt on the upholstery is showing. So in general, 1/2 inch is the way to go. Higher than that looks like it's too short, and dragging on the floor just looks like it doesn't fit. So I'm going to mark 7 inches right around. It's best to do this with something rigid. You could do it with a soft measuring tape, but a carpenter's measure or yardstick, a ruler, all work well. Okay, so I have this marked about every 5 inches or so. We're done. Stabbed myself again, so one of these pins was sticking out. Right. Pressure. I'm glad this is not white. But here we go. All right, done. Okay, time to take the T-pins out. So just go around the plates. Make sure the seams look good. I can take this apart. T-pins coming out. You can look at it. This is when it's nice to have these magnetic pin holders, because I can just throw the pins at the pin holder and it holds it. As you are taking these out, kind of tug on it and you'll see if you've missed any pins. Okay. Okay, something is holding this. That's good, that's good. When I think I have all my pins out, there'll be more that I've missed. No matter how careful, I know this, I always find more. Let's see, now this can be removed. This can be removed, so I've got these pins out. Let's get down to the back. All right, my outer back is still stuck in. Alright, that looks good, looks good, looks good. Got it. Alright. So now, the next step, we're going to trim all of these seams. Right now they're an inch, a half inch, 2 inches, they're whatever I pin them at. I need to trim these to exactly a half inch. And this is important. Your slipcover will only fit as well as how well you do your trimming. So some of the things aren't that important when you make a slipcover. Trimming is really important. So now we've got this off. I'm going to pause for a minute. We're going to get rid of the chair, and now we're going to be working on our cutting table while we do all this trimming. So the chair has disappeared. It's the magic of camera work. So here's our slipcover. Our looks like half a chair. So now we get to sit at a table. You're going to be working at your work table, so you're working at a good height. You don't have to be on your knees. A lot of the work now is much easier on your body. We're going to trim this all out, but first I'm going to start with the skirt. I marked the skirt mark at 7 inches. And I want to be able to cut on that line, so I'm going to mark it, finish marking it. So coming across here. This is in the way. Coming across. That was my front of the chair. Go to my back. Some of these don't always line up exactly right, and it's okay. You just kind of take an average of it. Here, as I go around, this is where my outer back connects. I want to be able to see how these are related. So this is seam allowance. So I can cut some of this away. Now I can see, aha, yes, they line up nicely. And finish it across. Now my skirt line is marked. This is my cutting line. Just going to cut it away. Here's a pin that goes right into my marked line. Don't try to cut pins. It's not good for the pin, and it's really not good for your scissors. It's important for this kind of job to have sharp scissors. You're cutting through, right now, 2 layers of fabric. Later on, I'll be cutting through 4. All right. Come through here. So now I have a pin right in the middle where I want to cut. Again, don't want to cut the pin. I could just take it out. You can separate these. Over there. Keeping my way going across. Remember, you're holding your 2 layers together. This pin came apart. I lost the other half of it, but it's in my way anyway, so I don't need it. Let that go. In general, while you're trying to do this, cut away if there's extra fabric that makes it difficult for you to see what's going on. So here, I could fold this back. This lines up. It's good. I'm going to start from this end. Another pin in my way. Now, my hem line, my skirt line is all set, ready to go. Now I need to trim every one of these seams that I very carefully pinned together. I can start anywhere I want. Generally, oh, here's a good place. This is the upper kind of shoulder. This is the inner back, the top of the chair, and here's the outer back. So the outer back piece is very rectangular, and in just about every chair it is. So I know that I'm going to have nice straight seams here. So I'll be trimming these out. So I just flip this around so that the seam that I care about is nice and flat. So I can eyeball what a 1/2 inch seam allowance looks like, because I've done this for a really long time. Okay. As I'm getting to the corner, you can see where the corner is here. Here I was able to go on this side. I might do another inch or so. And then I'm going to stop. Now I'm going to approach the rest of this seam from this side. You can see this is the top edge, where the arm is. Here's where our arm bumped out and then comes down to the hemline. So I'm going to work on this seam now. I can lay it flat. I'm going to approach the parts that are nice and straight. Okay. I'm getting to the tricky bump out. Cut some of this away. This part where it comes in, a little tricky, but this part is nice and straight. So let me get rid of this. I'll do that one. Right. That goes away. This goes away. I'm watching my pins and I'm going a ½ inch out. It's looking good. All right, now this part, when I try to feel it, there's a lot of stuff happening here. And I have to remember why. Aha. And that is because the inner arm is coming in to meet the back. This piece is meeting the back, and this piece is meeting the back. So I've got a lot of tricky stuff happening here. So I'm not ready to quite do that because I have a little trouble seeing it. But I do know that where this piece meets this piece, it's a nice straight seam. So I'm going to work on that. I'll flip it around. So I want to make sure I'm just cutting my 4 layers. Okay. So that can go away. So now that's looking good. That's looking good. Remember I stopped before I quite got to the corner? Now I've approached the corner from both sides. Now I can make that happen. So I could look on this side or on this side. Sometimes what you want to do is cut 2 layers. I've got my 4 layers here. I'm going to cut the 2 layers that are the outer back. And you can see it's kind of curved. Now I can see how this upper back and shoulder fit in. Now I can trim that to match the way it went here. And this may seem really tedious, but it's important to just do this as carefully as you can. So I've been eyeballing what a ½ inch seam allowance is. And when I make slipcovers, I like to have a ½ inch seam allowance. If you want a 5/8 seam allowance or a 3/4 inch seam allowance, that's what you trim, and then that's what you will sew. But don't cut a 3/4 inch seam allowance and then sew a half, because it's not going to work. Just remember whatever you're doing. Another way to approach this, if you have trouble eyeballing it, is you can mark this with a pencil or a pen. So here is the seam where the inner arm meets the outer arm, and I can lay this nice and flat. I have a pen. I can mark where it is. Like this. And it's generally easier to mark it between the pins. And remember, you know that this is a straight seam. So if you've got a pin, like this pin is a little wonky and doesn't quite line up with the rest of them, I know I can kind of ignore that and say, well, I don't quite trust that pin, but I trust the other pins. So here I've marked, I know it's a little hard to see, where my seam line is. If I wanted to, if I didn't trust my eye for doing a 1/2 inch seam allowance, I could then take a tape measure or one of those little adjustable seam allowance markers, and I could come out here and mark my 1/2 inch. And I've had students that do this. They say, we know it's important and we don't trust our eye. So I can mark off this 1/2 inch all along the seam. Okay. Now once I have that done, it's easy for me to connect these dots. So on your very first slipcover, this is the way you may want to do your seams. As you get more experience, you'll know. See how I can just cut right along these little dots. I'm going to go all the way to the back. So now this seam is done, all ready to go. Since I'm right here, I may as well do this seam. Now, this is where we had our tuck-ins and we had to curve the fabric around. This is something that's tricky. I don't want to get in here and start trimming until I can see it better. So I'm going to do this seam first and this seam. So as I am approaching the hard part, I want to be able to get rid of some of this excess so I can see what I'm doing. So I'm right here now, so I'll do this one. Looking good. And let me do this one. I have no place to start this. I can't go straight from here. I can't go straight from here. So I'm just going to cut in to here. And then I can start. So that's looking good. So here's a hole that we couldn't get all of our pins in. But we know that, here's what we know. We know that this seam has to go straight and this seam has to go straight. So I can just pull these fabrics together the way they have been and then just extend that seam along that same line, and the same on this edge. In fact, I already did it. So now that's straight, because we know that as this piece, which was the shoulder, meets in, it was square here. But because it was an inside angle, we weren't able to get all our pins in quite nicely. So that is looking good. And now, since this is cleaned up and this is cleaned up, I can finish this. So this is another one of these times where I've got a lot of planes intersecting in funny ways. So it's hard for me to exactly lay all of this flat. So this is one of these times when I want to do this 2 layers at a time. So here's my outer back. I'm going to cut the outer back pieces with my 1/2 inch seam allowance. Let's see, can't do that. So here's my 1/2 inch from here. And this can continue. Now I can see this little piece. That's going to go away. This little piece has a tail coming out. I know it's going to come in straight. That goes there. These are good. So now I just have this piece. I can see where my pin is. I'm going to lay it across this. Trim that in. All right. So these little tails just kind of got tucked in. Trim them away. Okay. Let me see how these pieces come together. It's 3. So that one out there. This one comes out here. So now these 3 elements will all fit together quite nicely. So this is good, this is good, this is good. All right, coming along. Since I'm here, I'm going to finish this top seam. So this is the inner back top. We're going to finish to here. Trim that off. I've lost a pin. It got all bent. But I can see how these pieces went together. And I can see the little marks. So here are my pin marks. I can still see the holes, and I could line them up. So I could replace the pin. Whenever you've taken this fabric off the chair, you're going to lose some pins. So try to find out where they were. Sometimes you can see where the holes were. Put them all back if you can. If you can't, guess, and it's probably going to be okay. You can't get too far off unless you lose a lot of pins in the same spot, in which case you've got to go back to the chair. But I think this being able to cut and trim at your table is so much easier than trying to trim this on the chair. And the more traditional slipcover makers, they always used to cut full, cut both sides, and trim on the chair, which meant a whole lot more time on your knees. I think working at the table makes life so much easier. Here's my inside back, my shoulder. I'm going to trim this out the same way here. I approach the corner, stopped a little bit away from it. I approach the corner and start a little bit away. So because it's going around a corner with a little bit of ease, I'm going to do this 2 layers at a time. So I'll do these first 2 layers, and I can see my pins. And then bring bring this back and match this. All right. So this is looking good. This is looking good. You might notice that I'm avoiding this because it's hard. It's the hard part. So let's go back to the front of the arm. We're going to do this the same way we did working in the back. Work on the straight stuff first. Here's the nice straight seam. All right, it comes out, bumps out a little. Across my top. Here's the top part of the arm. Here's where the three pieces meet. Look what happened to that pin. Got wrecked. So these pieces meet nice and extrapolate out. These meet quite nicely and they go up. And where these pieces meet, so they look good. I just have one layer here that is sticking out a little bit. Okay, that looks good. These pieces will all meet nicely. Same issue here. Yeah, lost a pin. Before I try to retrieve this one, I'm going to trim up this part because I know this part is good. And I know this part is all good. You can see, like, this is where 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces of fabric meet, and I've lost a pin. I'm going to leave that right there. So I'm going to be looking for the holes in where that pin goes. But in the meantime, from here up is good. So I can come into here. So this whole process is going from what you know and what you're really sure of towards the part that you don't know. Okay, so that's done. Okay, again, we've got a problem here, but this is good. So I know I can go from here. Good, and this is the inner arm, this is the deck, this is in with my tuck in, so these pins are all good. So let me trim this out. See how it gets cleaned up? And you can see so much better about what's going on. Okay. So now I can lay these pieces together and actually see where that pin was supposed to go. I've lost it. But I can see that this was continuing and this line was continuing. I'm going to put my pin back in. And then check to see, is that an extension of this line? And it pretty much is. So I'm going to cut this layer these two layers. 1, 2, in a straight line. Remember, this is the pin that I'm guessing belongs there. But I do know that it's, this is staying nice and flat, this is staying nice and flat, so it's probably pretty good. Okay. Now I've got how these pieces go together. These pieces are going to fit like this. And this piece is going to go here. So I can trim that off to match. All right. Now these pieces are going to be just like this. So these are not looking nice. All right. Almost done. Almost done. All right, now I can flip this around. Now we're going to work on that inner corner in that sort of crotch area. This is where my deck meets my inner arm with my tuck in. And 1, 2, 3. I only have 3 layers. I don't know what happened. Aha. Look what happened. This was supposed to get pinned in. I messed it up. I lost this layer. So what am I going to do about it? Well, what I do know is this deck piece has to be symmetrical. So I am going to trim out the layer that I do know. I know where my halfway point is. So then later on, I can open this piece up and trim the layer that I lost. So I can recover. I don't have to go back to the chair. So, this is my deck where it meets the inner arm, and trim it off. Okay. So you can see my last pin is here. And I don't have any pins in this area, either from this side or from this side. And that's because this is the area where the deck meets the back, meets the arm. This is all getting tucked in. And we kind of planned about a 3-inch tuck in. So I wasn't able to pin that far back. But the best way to do it is to just now take it to the table and lay it flat and then just cut it straight back. And here's where the deck meets the inner back. I'm going to lay that flat. And we could only get 2 pins in here because we couldn't get into that little corner. So I'm just going to put them flat against each other. This is where I lost my piece. Let that be. And I can cut this back. You can see I'm being a lot less careful about this stuff. I was very careful when I was working on the back, the arm, the front. This is all tucked in into the recesses of the chair, and on top of that it's going to be covered by the cushion. So if it isn't perfect, it's fine with me. So I've exposed this into here. So now deck connecting to the inner back is in good shape. The deck connecting to the inner arm is in good shape. And now this is where the inner back connected to the inner arm. And this is where we had so much trouble cutting this seam, because I needed to add some tuck-in space and I needed to curve it around the chair itself. But now that I've got it on the table, I can see that it really is a flat seam. So, but it gets pretty tricky here. But it's not so tricky down here. So I'm going to go from the ordinary plain stuff up to where it gets tricky. So I can lay this flat. There would have been no way that I could trim that seam before, but once it's on the table, and you can see this pin isn't quite lined up with this pin and this pin, but this is all tucked in. So I'm just kind of averaging it, just making it look like a seam. I was cutting from this side, now I'm going to flip this over because I can see these pins quite nicely. Okay. All right, look at this. So that's where all of these pieces are going to go together. This pin has come out, but that's okay. Yeah, we can put it back. So this is all nice. Got a little wrinkling here. That's okay. Again, that's in a spot where it's going to get tucked in. So we're trimmed. This is what our chair looks like now. Now you can start seeing how much neater it looks and how it's actually going to come together. So, one last thing to do before we do this, because we have to take it apart. I want to be able to make sure I know the relative position of one piece of fabric to the next on all of these pieces. And the way to do this is by notching. I'm going to make reference marks on all of these seams. And you do that by taking a seam and look at it and go, all right, if it's a straight seam, it's kind of easy to sew. I know it's straight at the bottom, straight at the top. This one has a little bump into it. I could have trimmed that a little better. So if I had these two pieces completely apart, I want to know how they reference each other. The way to do that is with notches. And if you've ever followed a sewing pattern, you know what notches are all about. So in making a slipcover, more notches are better than fewer notches. I always notch at the beginning of a seam and the end of a seam. So here's the beginning of this seam. I'm going to notch 1.5 inches in, and then up here at the end of my seam, I'm going to notch near the corner. And then you notch anytime there's anything tricky going on. You notch in front of the trickiness and then after the trickiness. So here's a little curve. So I'm going to notch. If I was sewing up, I want to make sure that these pieces are aligned here before I get to that. So I will notch. And then I will sew that, and then I'm going to notch again after. So on this seam, almost straight, notch at the beginning, a notch at the end, and I got a little curve thing happening, so I notch in front of it and after it. Here's where my inner arm meets my outer arm. It's a giant long seam. I'm going to hold these together. I'm going to notch at the beginning. I'm going to notch at the end. And we know that they have to fit between. And there's nothing tricky happening here, but because it's so long, I'm going to put another notch in the middle. So I know that while I'm sewing, if I'm sewing these things together, the notches match. When I get to the middle, I know that these pieces have to match when I get here. So on long seams, you can do them. This only needs 3, but curves, many notches, anything tricky. So here's, because it's right here, here's a seam that is going, this is the shoulder of it where it hits the arm. We're going to go from here to here. So I'm going to notch beginning and I notch at the end. If I wanted to, put another notch in the middle. If you're insecure, more notches are better than fewer. Fewer notches, you lose track of where things are. Here's where the back hits that arm. This is actually very similar to the front of the arm. I'm going to put all these pieces together. Beginning, here's the tricky part. And then at the end. So this piece, like the front, I did 1, 2, 3, 4. This piece is pretty straight, but I'll do it at the beginning. And up here, see, I'm going to be, this gets a little tricky, so I'm going to notch in front of it, and then I'm going to notch right after it. Okay. This is all straight, and it comes to my center part. I always mark my centers with like a little notch, but I'd probably put another notch in here someplace, just to make sure. Okay, so that's good. All right, flipping this around. See how this is so much easier to do on a table. These are my center, this is my inner back, and then the top piece. This is where my fold is. Notch those. I'll go someplace in the middle. We're going to go around this curve. Go in front of it. And you could do like 3 or 4 notches around this a curve. Really helps to have good sharp scissors. So now I'm coming down and getting it to the end. And I'll put another one here. Okay. What else that's notched, this one. This is where the inner back meets the inner arm. This is all a tuck-in, but remember we had to slash? So sometimes if you've slashed, it kind of gives you notches already. So sometimes I just sort of repeat this notch on the other side. And do something near the bottom. That's good, that's good. That one's good. This is where the deck meets the inner arm, where the tuck-in is. I want something towards the back as I come to this little piece, before it, after it, and then right here at the beginning. All right, now we're back to the front again. We started here, we went all around the piece, now we're back. We didn't finish this part. So this piece, beginning and end. I can take that. Well, I'll leave it there. Where the front of the arm meets the front of the chair. I've lost a pin, but I had already trimmed it, so I can line this all up, and one pin has stayed nicely, so near the top and near the bottom. That's good. The front panel meets the deck. My centers. Trim those off, and then trim here. So, all right, this little guy is all trimmed and notched. And last thing we're going to do today is we're going to start taking it apart. Now, if you wanted to serge all of this before you started sewing, you could take this completely apart. I would label each of the pieces and then mark them and then stack them all up and then take them to the serger, serge them, and then you got to put them back together again. But this doesn't need serging, and a lot of slip covers don't need serging. Depends on their fabric, what's going to happen to it. So I'm just going to show you how to start taking this apart to get it ready to sew without taking it completely apart. So I'm going to take a seam, and here's my outer back. I want to keep these pieces together relative to each other and near where there's seams, so to keep the seams somewhat together. So here I am, I'm taking out a bunch of these pins. Now, when I put this together to sew, I'm going to be sewing these two inner layers together, and then these two outer layers are going to get sewn together. So when I'm taking it apart, I'm going to keep my notches relatively close to each other, but they don't have to be exact. I am pinning my inner two layers together like this. Remember we had all four pinned together? Now we're separating them. My inner two are together, and then I'm going to pull this away, and I'm going to pin these two together. And I can see my notches. I'm going to keep them kind of closely related to each other. Okay, and then I'm going to go on. Now these pins have all four layers together. Take out a few of them. pinning my 2 layers together. And I'm pinning the 2 outer layers together. This seems really complicated, but you're going to see what happens. It's actually kind of like magic. I'm still working on this seam. I have 2 more pins here. Take them out. I'm pinning the 2 inner ones together and the 2 outer ones together. Keep working on this seam. You know, we've spent hours putting these pins in. And now we're taking a leap of faith as we start taking them out. Okay. I've got 3 more here. Okay. These are my 2 inner layers. They belong together. And you notice now, when I was putting the pins for the seams, we were doing them every 2 inches or so. Now I only need pins every 6 inches or so. Okay. That's together. All right, I may as well, since this is right here in front of me, this is the inner back to the top of the chair. I've had people take this slipcover class with me, and then when they do it on their own, they call and they say, "Tell me again how I take it apart." Or an email or something. But they would have everything, and they were too afraid to take it completely apart. But couldn't remember. You do your 2 inner layers go together, and the 2 outer layers go together. So a number of my pins, you can see, because we're making, this is slipcover work, I bent them. And that's because after it's all pinned together, we're pulling and tugging and all of that. So that's why I use a heavier duty pin when I'm doing this, when I'm pin fitting a slipcover. The fine silk pins or even quilting pins, the gauge of the metal of the pin itself is very thin, which is what you want when you're working with either silk or quilting materials. But for slipcovers, you need something a little heavier. So you want to try to find a heavier duty pin. These are 24 gauge, and they come in a big box. Sometimes you can find them in the sewing shops, sometimes you can't. Mail order is always good. Here's another seam. 2, 4. So you notice before I shift this around, I've taken the pins out, and I don't want it to go too far. I'm going to be pinning these inner layers. And then the outers. I want to keep the pieces in good position relative to their neighbor and what they're going to have to be sewn to. 2 outers. That's done. All right. Since I'm here, I'll work on this part. Take out a few pins. Pull the 2 inner layers, stick them together. The outer ones, stick them together. Do the inner ones first and then kind of tuck them in. And do the outers. Okay, coming together here. All right. It's like watching paint dry, isn't it? Kind of boring. But I want to show you what happens when it's all done. You'll see that it does all come together. Okay. Now, getting to the front, almost done. Coming on. Just 2 more seams, 2 more seams. This is so boring. Think about how much longer it would be if we were doing a sofa. last seam. Here we go. Even if we lose all these pins, we still have our notches and our carefully trimmed seams, so that we would be okay. We'd be able to put this back together, even though we've lost it completely. So it's good. I think I have them all now. So now I've pinned just two pieces, two slipcover pieces that are going to go together to form a seam, and in their correct relative positions. So I should be able to turn this little sucker, whoops, until I find out parts that I've missed. Open it completely. It looks like a mess now, but you'll see what we have when we're done. We'll have both sides of our slipcover complete, and the pieces will be placed in their the correct relative position. So I don't know what happened here. I do remember that we messed up on the decking, but we can sort that out afterwards. So it may not be entirely perfect, but oh, here's a seam I forgot. There's 4 layers together. So I'm going to pin the 2 inner ones together. And the 2 outer ones together. Okay. So now it's going to look like a cover. It's going to look like a chair. Here is the back of our chair. The back is where our zipper's going to go. This is our inner back. Here's our right arm. Here's our left arm. Right. And we've got the front. We have our arms. And we could kind of hang this over the chair and to just kind of go, yep, we've got all the pieces. And we've got them kind of pinned together the way they are going to be sewn together, just roughly. You will see that in some cases, on one side of this, the rough seams are pinned together, right sides together, the way you sew them. And then the opposite side, they're pinned together wrong side together. You can see it up here, which means I've got to flip this before I sew it. But that's because of the way, because we were doing double on half. So you can see this side, the right sides are together, the way they will be sewn. Here, it's the wrong sides together. So I need to flip this back when I'm getting ready to sew it. But I have my notches. I could take this apart and repin it all right sides together. But now I've got all of my pieces in their relative positions, and we're going to get ready to sew, which will be the next time. So we did it. All our pieces are cut, notched, trimmed. It will make the sewing go so quickly. And at the end of the day, we only did the pin fitting on half, which means we did half the work. And I know taking this apart is a bit of work, but still better than trying to pin both sides. So it will go quickly now. All right, see you next time.